Welcome back. I had to make an abrupt stop to a friend and our guest, former state assemblyman. As you were talking about Judy Chu and the degree to which an awful lot of organizations in this country have been penetrated by something called the United Front Work Department of the Chinese Communist Party. Forgive my interruption there, Chuck, but remind us what the United Front is all about and how pernicious it is.
Right. So Beijing basically looks at the Chinese diaspora as an opportunity to develop intelligence contacts and very important areas of essentially controlling what they see as potential assets around the world, including in the United States. And so what ends up happening is that frequently, not all, but a significant portion of ethnic groups in America are going to find themselves, these are Chinese American ethnic groups, are going to find themselves with some degree of penetration or control by the United Front. Now, Frank, this is not unique to the Chinese community. In my state assembly district, for example, I had a fairly large diaspora from Persia, the class of 1979 out of Iran. And there were active groups there that were controlled by the mullahs in Tehran. And frankly, I didn't know which side was which. Occasionally, I'd show up to an event, and then I'd have my Iranian friends say, "How could you? You showed up at the event of the people who were in favor of the mullahs." And it's like, look, it's your job to tell me which group I'm not supposed to show up and deliver a speech to. So this is pervasive, Frank. And let me give you a very quick example. In California, there's a constitutional amendment that prohibits discrimination by race and ethnicity and gender in state contracting and in state college admissions. Now, of course, the UC system has figured out ways of getting around it. But a few years back, it was going to be proposed to eliminate that so as to allow, for example, for racial quotas in the UC system. And it was moving forward. It passed one chamber of the legislature, Frank. And then China found out about it, and they activated their network of people because, for example, in my old district, University of California, Irvine, close to half the student body there was Chinese Americans, of whom a large amount were from mainland China. And if this bill passed, and if it was approved by the people and changed the Constitution, the only way that you could get more other minorities on campus was if you significantly reduced the number of Chinese Americans. And China didn't like that for two reasons. Number one, they were training a lot of their advanced degree people at the UC system who would come back then and lead very important efforts in China. And number two, they were stealing so much intellectual property that was being financed by the federal government that they couldn't afford to lose that opportunity. So China activated their heretofore quiescent network in California, and overnight, you saw an amazing amount of civic involvement saying, no, we can't have this bill passed. And what you saw, Frank, was an abrupt about-face of the Democrats in the California legislature, including a number of Asian Americans who flipped their vote against this measure to eliminate a portion of the prohibition on discrimination. Because China, it wasn't good for China.
Yeah, well, this is a part and parcel of what I think we're seeing at the federal level as well. And, last night we had the first hearing of this new select committee in the House of Representatives that's supposed to be getting to the bottom of this so-called competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. It'll be very interesting to see whether they're going to dig down on this elite capture phenomenon, and I pray they will. I think Judy Chu's got a lot in her background that is not as innocent as you're visiting with the wrong Iranians. Let's be clear about that. But Chuck, let me turn to one last thing before we have to let you go. You've written recently, I believe at Fox News, about the threat that is now looming domestically to our Electoral College. Just a quick word or two on why the Electoral College is important and how this threat is manifesting itself and its implications.
Yeah, this is called the National Popular Vote Initiative, and what they seek to do is through an interstate compact, as soon as enough states join that have a majority of the Electoral College, that it would go into effect. Presumably, it would have to be approved by Congress. There's some debate about that among academics, but but that's the concept. And so essentially, I think we're at about 17 states now. We're just short enough that if, for example, Texas were to forget itself and to agree to join, that might be enough to push it over the top. And so essentially what that would do is if this were to happen and the national popular vote were to be won by, let's say, Joe Biden in 2024, but Texas voted for someone else, then Texas would agree, if it had joined, to apply all of its Electoral College votes to the winner. And the problem with that, Frank, is number one, it's a violative of the Constitution. It's essentially amending the Constitution without going to the trouble of amending the Constitution, without getting a two-thirds vote in each chamber or two-thirds of the states and then three-fifths of the states to ratify. So going through the normal process, right, to ratify three-quarters of the states. So the challenge with that is that they're trying to bypass constitutional norms. And number two, we have an electoral college for a reason, right? The reason, of course, was not to, as some of the revisionists say, to protect slavery or some other nefarious purpose. The reason is that we have a federal system in which states matter. States are supposed to have a role in this system. We have checks and balances at the federal level with three co-equal branches. Likewise, we're supposed to have a check and balance between the national or federal government and the states. The Electoral College is part of that. So I would hope that the remaining states that are considering the national popular vote would look at this and understand that if you really want to get rid of the Electoral College, let's do it the right way and let's amend the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, it's a seductive appeal that's being made, I think, namely that this is all about the popular vote. And the popular vote, as the framers of our Constitution understood so well, and you do too, Chuck DeVore, of course, is that can lead to mobocracy.
Right. Well, there's a great example out of California, right? When you go to register to vote in California, your signature on your voter registration is considered to be proof of your eligibility to vote. Frank, they don't check your citizenship status in California. They do in Texas, though. But if a national popular vote were to pass, you'd see this race to the bottom among the states to loosen not only the rules, but the safeguards that ensure that the people who are voting for president are actually eligible to vote. And again, that's part of the problem.
Well, let me ask you about a related point, Chuck, because it's now something that's up for action, I guess, in the nation's capital, namely giving non-citizens the right to vote very explicitly, not by accident, but by design. Now, in this case, as I think elsewhere, that's not necessarily going to mean that they are legally entitled to vote for president or for Congress, if that's applicable, but they are going to be on the voter rolls.
Right.
And the question then arises, are there going to be separate voter rolls for those other offices, and how will you keep them straight? We have enough problems with the voter rolls as it is, as you know. You take seriously, I know, election integrity, Chuck. How serious a problem is this, do you think?
Yeah, it's going to be an administrative nightmare to basically maintain or curate two parallel voter rolls. One where, for example, you have individuals who are authorized to vote in a local election, let's say for school board, and another only in federal elections. Texas, for example, has looked at this and has considered the preventative measure of completely separating out the electoral cycles between federal and state and local. And they've done so, by the way, not specifically with regards to this proposal, but proposals that would, for example, ban photo ID for federal elections. And so Texas is kind of taking it, is looking at it from the other side of the equation, right? That if the federal government were to loosen rules for federal elections, then Texas could keep the more safe rules for its state.
We have to return to this topic with you, Chuck. We are out of time. Thank you for yours today. Come back to us next time. We'll be right back with more.